In 1950, a red car became cursed by tragedy. Decades later, that same haunted machine, Christine, finds its way to Arnie, drawing him into an obsession where love turns to terror. Get ready for a dark journey where fate and horror collide. So let's dive in the video. The film begins in 1950 inside a car factory where several vehicles are being repaired. Among them is a red car. A mechanic is working on the car's engine. While he is testing the engine, the car's hood suddenly slams shut on its own, and his hand is severely injured. He is rushed to the doctor. Later, another mechanic comes to inspect a different car. While inside, he asks for a cigarette and accidentally falls onto a seat. Several hours later, the work at the factory ends and everyone leaves. However, on their way out, the supervisor notices that the red car's lights are still on. When he opens the car door, the lifeless body of the mechanic, who had been smoking a cigarette, is found lying outside. 28 years later, we meet a student named Dennis, who arrives at the home of his friend Arnie with his car. Arnie is a straightforward, studious fellow. Although Dennis and Arnie are completely different in many ways, they have become very close friends. On their first day at school, when they retrieve new books from their lockers, they notice a new girl named Lee. Lee's beauty captivates nearly every boy at school. Later, while Dennis and Arnie are on their way home, Arnie suddenly spots a car parked in front of a house. He tells Dennis to stop the car. As they approach, they see that it is a red classic car, the very car we saw at the beginning of the story, although now it is completely dilapidated. Still, Arnie feels a deep attraction toward the car. At that very moment, the car's owner, Georgie, appears. He explains that the car is called Christine, and it belonged to his brother, who had died a few weeks earlier. Georgie wanted to get rid of the car quickly, so he planned to sell it for just $50. Dennis advises Arnie that buying such a wreck doesn't make sense, but Arnie ignores him and buys the car anyway. That evening, when Arnie returns home and tells his parents about the purchase, they scold him. His parents insist that the car cannot be kept at home. Later, Arnie and Dennis take the car to a garage, where they meet the garage owner, Will, a grumpy old man, who nevertheless agrees to let Arnie store the car there. Dennis later asks Arnie why he bought such a badly ruined car. Arnie replies, "I didn't choose the car chose me." One day at lunch, while Dennis waits for Arnie, he grows worried when Arnie doesn't show up. Dennis goes looking for him and finds a boy named Birdie harassing Arnie. Dennis tries to intervene, but Birdie shoves Arnie, and Arnie falls. In the ensuing scuffle, Arnie's glasses are knocked to the ground and break. Later, while taking Arnie home, they laugh at the mishap. But Dennis seizes an opportunity to launch an attack on a group gathered near the house. As Dennis's group surrounds him, a teacher suddenly arrives and stops the chaos. Arnie later tells the teacher that he was frightened by the sight of a knife. The teacher finds the knife in his pocket and takes Arnie and his group to the office. Consequently, Arnie is expelled from school. Several weeks pass. Arnie then devotes himself day and night to repairing the car. The garage owner offers him work so that he can retrieve spare parts for the car. Arnie accepts and works with great dedication, though he remains unaware that he has developed an abnormal attraction to Christine. One day, Dennis visits the garage to see Arnie. He is astonished to find that Arnie has completely changed. Now, without his old glasses, dressed in stylish clothes, and displaying a more refined demeanor, Arnie barely speaks to Dennis. Instead, he goes straight to work in the garage. Later, Arnie's mother, trying to stop him, expresses her deep concern. She confides in Dennis that she is very worried about Arnie and his new car, Christine, because she has heard that the previous owner of the car died from suffocation inside it. Hearing this, Dennis meets with Georgie. Georgie then recounts his brother Christian's story. He explains that when his brother bought the car, he became almost obsessed with it on the road. That same car was also where his wife and daughter tragically lost their lives. And after his brother's death, the car somehow returned by itself to the garage. Later, Georgie went to the garage to see the car. When he tried to open it by pulling the handle, the car's radio suddenly switched on by itself. Frightened, Georgie fled. The next morning, Dennis is at the school stadium for a football match. While planning to score a special goal, he sees Arnie arriving. Now Christine has been completely restored and looks remarkably good. Bertie and his friends are amazed, and Lee, who gets out of her car, teases Arnie in front of everyone. Dennis grows a little annoyed, and his focus on the game is broken. Taking advantage of the distraction, an opposing player shoves Dennis, causing him to fall hard onto the ground, so hard that he loses consciousness and is rushed to the hospital with severe injuries. A few days later, when Dennis regains consciousness, he sees that his leg and neck are bandaged. At that moment, Arnie comes to see him. Dennis realizes that his friend has changed dramatically. Just a month ago, Arnie was very timid and always listened to his family, but now he is not the same. That evening, Arnie goes to the movies with Lee. After the film, the two become quite close in the car, but suddenly, Lee gets out. When Arnie follows her, Lee says, "You love this car more than you love me." Although Arnie finds her words odd, he somehow manages to calm Lee and brings her back into the car. Just then, the windshield suddenly malfunctions. Arnie steps out to examine it while Lee begins snacking inside the car. Suddenly, the car radio turns on by itself, and a bright light starts emanating from the dashboard. Lee feels as though she cannot breathe. She frantically tries to open the car door, but it is locked from the inside. Lee is nearly on the verge of death. At the last moment, she manages to unlock the door and escape. A man standing nearby pulls her from the car, but Arnie, enraged, attacks the man. However, the man turns out to have been trying to free Lee from her broken glasses. Eventually, the situation calms, and Arnie takes Lee home. Lee gets out of the car and heads straight home, declaring that she no longer wishes to speak with Arnie. Arnie tries to convince her otherwise, but Lee firmly says, "This car has tried to kill me." Lee goes on, "I can't stand it. Every time we're together in the car, something terrible happens." Hearing this, Arnie suggests, "Let's talk tomorrow." Later, Arnie sits in the car, but it won't start. While he is talking with Christine, the car, Arnie says, "Today, whether or not I go with Lee, I will always love you." Then Arnie turns the key, and the car roars to life. He drives straight to the garage, leaving Christine behind, and returns home. Unbeknownst to them, however, a group called Batty and his cronies break into the garage with weapons and quickly destroy the car completely. The next day, Arnie somehow manages to convince Lee, and the two go to the garage together. But upon entering, Arnie is struck with shock at the state in which Christine now lies. Lee asks in astonishment, "Who did this?" Suddenly, Arnie begins yelling at her for no apparent reason and orders Lee to leave. Later, Arnie tells his parents about the incident. They try to calm him down, promising that they will buy him a new car, but Arnie becomes even angrier. He is convinced that his parents, like Lee, despise Christine. Worse still, Arnie holds his parents responsible for Christine's condition, arguing that if they had kept the car at home properly, it would have been fine. In frustration, Arnie berates his parents as he heads toward his room. His father grabs him from behind and insists that he apologize to his mother. Arnie, using harsh language, refuses to comply and eventually storms out of the house. Determined, Arnie goes straight to Christine and decides to fix the car once again. But this time, he witnesses something he can hardly believe. It appears as if Christine is magically repairing herself. With delight, the car seems to say, "What more can you do?" Within moments, the car is completely restored to a brand new condition. Later that night, we see one of their acquaintances, Muchi, stopping a truck to rob it. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine is heard from afar. When Muchi goes to investigate, he discovers that Christine is now in pristine condition and is being driven by Arnie. He realizes that Arnie has learned that, along with Birdie, Christine was meant to be destroyed. Frightened, Mujib begins apologizing to Arnie. But then, suddenly, the car's headlights blaze on and, at a high speed, the car charges toward Muchi. Muchi flees into a narrow alley, and it seems the car will not follow him. Yet Christine pursues him relentlessly. At last, Muchi takes refuge in an old warehouse, but Christine does not let him go. Trapped in a corner, Muchi finds no escape as Christine corners him. Muchi draws a knife and threatens Arnie, but Christine forcefully barges in and cruelly knocks him down. The next morning, Arnie goes to Dennis to inform him of Muchi's death. Dennis is astonished. He cannot believe that although Christine had been completely destroyed, it somehow managed to repair itself. But Arnie gives no further explanation. He leaves in silence. Later, Arnie calls Lee and asks to meet, but Lee refuses, which infuriates Arnie further. Meanwhile, Lee and her friend Dawn are driving while drinking, when suddenly a car starts tailing them. They stop at a Birdie service station to check who is in the other car, but the headlights prevent them from seeing clearly. Then, Batty reverses his car, but it turns out the other vehicle is also reversing in the same way. They soon realize that the car trailing them is none other than Christine. In a fit of rage, Batty speeds away with his car and stops at a gas station, where his friend Richie is working. Batty gets out, picks up a metal rod, and prepares to confront the pursuer. But suddenly, Christine speeds toward the station and collides with Batty's car, causing significant damage. Inside the house, Arnie is in the car, instructing Arnie to get out, but Christine slams the car into the garage. Dawn, who was in the car, is thrown back along with the house's car as petrol begins to leak. Suddenly, the car catches fire, and within seconds, a horrific explosion engulfs the garage. Richie is burned to death in the flames. The house's occupants attempt to flee, but the blazing Christine gives chase, and eventually Christine rams the house, setting it ablaze. After a while, someone hears the sound of a car in the garage. They discover that Christine has reappeared, motionless and smoldering in the smoke. Astonishing, for another car had been outside fixing something. The onlooker, armed with a gun, goes to check who is inside Christine. However, the car door is so hot that he uses a cloth to open it, only to find that the car is completely empty. The thought does not fully register in his mind before he himself climbs into the car. But this mistake comes at a heavy price. Christine will leave no living witness today. Suddenly, the car door locks from the inside, and Christine forcefully slams her seat against the dashboard, striking him from behind. The next morning, Arnie and Dennis meet with Detective Jenkins. The detective informs them that the owner of the garage, Will, has been sentenced to death, and Arnie is convinced that Christine's hand is behind this, for the car is shining as if it were brand new once again. Meanwhile, Dennis returns home from the hospital and Lee calls him asking to meet. Lee confesses that she feels Christine has completely controlled Arnie. His blind love for the car is driving him insane. Dennis remarks that he believes Arnie would never willingly do anything wrong, but if Christine has taken control of his mind, then she must be destroyed. Lee then goes home. Shortly after, Arnie arrives at his home with Christine. He tells Dennis to come for a drive. Dennis gets into the car but is taken aback by Arnie's behavior. Suddenly, Arnie begins driving at high speed and releases the steering wheel. Terrified, Dennis exclaims, "Christine, you're not in control." But Arnie retorts, "Nothing can come between me and Christine." To prove his point, Arnie shifts into full speed in the opposite lane, barely avoiding a collision with the car ahead. The next day, Dennis leaves a note on Christine's bonnet for Arnie, asking him to meet at the garage that evening. At dusk, Dennis and Lee wait at the workshop, but Arnie does not show up. They then take a nearby Jeep and drive him to the workshop. They decide that Lee will remain in the office, while Arnie is barred from entering. Dennis then plans to destroy Christine with a bulldozer. According to plan, Lee heads to the office, but they soon learn that Christine has already been hiding amid the workshop's junk. Suddenly, Christine turns on her headlights and advances toward Lee in an attempt to overtake her. Lee clings desperately to a dangling tire to save her life, yet Christine does not relent and continues her attack. Just then, Dennis brings out the Jeep's clamp to shield Lee. Afterwards, Christine backs off and slips into another corner of the workshop. Dennis drags the Jeep in the opposite direction. Soon, Christine and another figure named Jessica come face to face. It turns out that Christine was not acting alone. Arnie had been assisting her. Now fully in control of the car, Arnie suddenly sees Christine turn on her headlights, and within seconds, completely repair herself. Yet Jessica stops working, and Dennis attempts to restart her. Meanwhile, Christine advances toward the office at high speed to push Lee back. The car collides with a large shock, and Arnie's windshield shatters, sending him flying out. Lee rushes over to check on Arnie, but suddenly Arnie leaps up to warn her. Tragically, a large piece of the windshield has embedded itself in his body. In his final moments, Arnie reaches out to touch his beloved car, but due to his severe injuries, he dies before Christine can claim him. Lee quickly flees the scene, but Christine, seeking revenge, shifts into reverse and strikes her. Just then, the car collides with a pillar and becomes wedged. Seizing the opportunity, Dennis starts the Jeep and charges toward Christine, slamming into the car with tremendous force. Christine struggles to defend herself and tries to move toward Lee, but Dennis's clamp pushes her from behind, sapping some of her strength. Lee rushes to Dennis and Jessica, but meanwhile Christine again rallies and attempts to repair herself. To permanently destroy this demonic force, Dennis brings in a bulldozer and completely hurls Christine back. Despite her desperate attempts to survive, Christine is finally utterly destroyed in the ensuing battle. The next day, Dennis and Lee meet Detective Jenkins at Junkyard, where they find that Christine has been reduced to a scrap of metal. The three of them leave, but then they notice that a small fragment of Christine is still moving on its own. Clearly, this cursed car is still alive. And with that, the story ends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this explanation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into your favorite movies. See you in the next video. Bye.